Hi, I'm Don Portala, and you're listening to Maintaining Sweat Equity, the plight of small business in the wake of COVID. So I should start by explaining that this project was originally conceived as a documentary film about small businesses and the impact that COVID-19 has had on them. And while that documentary may still come to fruition, I thought there would be even more value in reformatting this all into a podcast. I've personally learned so much from the discussions that I've had with so many of these small business owners, then rather than try to condense it all into a collection of sound bites, I thought it might be more effective to find a way to share this in a longer format. Also, a documentary is sort of a one-and-done thing. Turning this into a podcast allows for the conversation to continue as the world around us continues to change from moment to moment, which, let's face it, is exactly what's happening right now. This first episode is from my interview with Andy Wesby. Andy is the band leader of Young Love and the Thrills, a Boston-based wedding band that's been performing under that brand since 2013. Young Love is a group of high-energy, dance party-style performers who I could personally say are one of the most unique ensembles you can find anywhere in New England. And I can say that because they were the band that I hired for my own wedding. I've known Andy for almost 10 years now, and he's one of the most talented musicians I've ever met, and just an all-around good guy. What Andy provides in this interview is an important perspective from the side of a wedding vendor. 2020 was an absolutely abysmal year for the wedding industry, and unfortunately so many brides and grooms bore the brunt of it by having to make enormous compromises to their wedding day by reducing guests, changing venues, or even postponing or canceling the date. When you've spent years planning what should be the happiest day of your life, only to have all of those plans fall apart while losing thousands of dollars in the process, there's no other way to describe it. It's tragic. But one of the considerations that gets lost is how adversely these same circumstances affected the people hired to help plan for that special day. And Andy lays it out all here expertly. One last thing to note. This interview was conducted in early October of 2020, so some of the mandates and restrictions that are discussed may currently be out of date by the time you're listening to this. With all that said, let's hear from Andy.
My name is Andy Wesby, and I am manager and owner of a small boutique company that is YLATT Productions, which is also known as Young Love and the Thrills.
So just to start, Andy, can you tell me a little bit about Young Love and the Thrills? How did you guys get started, and what are sort of the normal challenges that you would face on a typical year?
Young Love started as a band that branched out from an original group that I had been in, and we had toured, and we were just all done with that. We were seeing that band kind of starting to die, and I really wanted to sleep at home more and make real money. So we started doing weddings in 2010. We rebranded in 2013, became Young Love. I took over the business. With anything, any small business, or I would say any business, the initial goal is just to build a relationship and a reputation. And we did that through basically word of mouth and experiential business, which is just to say that people who book us most often are doing it because they've either seen us at an event or they're really close with someone who had us at one of their weddings. For anyone who's not close with a musician, they probably don't know that making a full-time living off of music is one of the hardest things to do. And there is such a disparity. When you do original music specifically, it's basically you make nothing and then maybe you make a lot of money. So the wedding world really offers an opportunity for a bunch of people who have dedicated their entire lives to a craft to make a full-time living off of music. And that's why we're expensive, because these are people who do this full-time, and a lot of the time the big ticket each week for musicians are the weddings that they're playing. And keep in mind, I know a lot of musicians, including my drummer, who tour full-time with big acts, and they still make more money playing weddings. I've had a rotating cast of musicians that have come and gone, usually horn players, sometimes auxiliary members, who go on the road for 3 months with some huge name, and then they come back and play a string of weddings so they can pay their bills. And it's just such a hard industry and world to make money in. And the wedding industry is kind of this little pocket where a lot of really great players can make a living off of it and not walk away from their passion, and I would say their calling. Normal challenges for us in any year is basically trying to meet our quota of how many gigs we're going to do per year, which is about 50 weddings a year and roughly 75 gigs total with public events and some smaller events. I think the biggest challenge is just not going insane from playing the same material all the time, and so trying to keep it fresh is a big thing. I don't think we ever had any major obstacles as a business. Uh, I don't remember a single year where I thought, oh, this is a major setback. You lose personnel over the years. That type of attrition is normal, especially when you need at least a portion of the group to be young. But none of it ever felt like this might be the end until this year.
So, what was your initial response, like your initial reaction when the pandemic first hit earlier this year in March?
I would imagine that my story and experience, the way that it started, is very similar to lots of other businesses in the area, which was the announcement of the shutdown on March 15th. Of course, at the time, I thought this will last a few weeks, but my perspective and outlook on how things were going to go changed drastically only in about a 6-week period. So from mid-March to the end of April, I went from thinking, we'll get through this, things will be back to normal by June, and by the end of April, I was saying the whole year is gone. I guarantee it. By the time we got to May, maybe middle of May, I started saying, I don't know if next year is going to be any better. So for me, it started with an influx of nervous emails and phone calls from clients that we had contracts with. April and May weddings, it made sense to me that they were concerned. People in June and on, I thought, yo, slow your roll. Let's just figure out exactly how this is going to be dealt, how this is going to be handled by the municipality and state government, federal government. But when I started to see contract after contract moving to the fall or postponing to next year, I started to deal with all these questions I've never had to answer before. And that was really tough because normally I'll get an email and I can respond to it within a couple minutes, and it's a brainless operation. This was very different. Sometimes I'd be on the phone with another band leader for an hour trying to figure out how to field a question I've never been asked before. And they were doing the same with me. There was a lot of conversation amongst people in the industry, mostly for me with other band leaders and photographers, about how we were going to save the year. And the first initial goal was to try to push anyone who was postponing to pushing later into the year, because we all thought, at least most of us thought, that this would be handled or over or gone by the fall. But again, that really changed for me drastically as I just started to realize this is not something small, and it's not something that's temporary. In fact, it's probably going to get worse, and it did.
So just to take a step back, let me ask you, because when you're saying that you're being asked questions that you've never been asked before, can you try and help frame this a little bit for folks who don't manage a wedding band or play live music? What are like the typical or normal challenges that you face when you're getting ready for an event like this versus what was different about the questions you were being asked later this year?
Okay. Typically with a client that we have a contract with in an event that's coming up, we get into the planning process a few months out, just planning on our end. They've been planning for often 2 years, but we need to know the specifics of what we're going to do. Special dances like the first dance or parent dances, their preferred songs, styles of music. One of the tougher things to deal with are clients who kind of want to micromanage our set list and our style. I ask clients to go through our song list, highlight what they love, cross out what they hate, but to be conservative in how they think they should dictate, and dictate is the word I'm using intentionally. But this year, instead of questions like, hey, do you guys know this version of a particular song, or small issues around the timing of the event, I was faced with questions like, how can we possibly get all our money back because we feel no confidence at all anymore about an event happening this year or next? Questions like, I know that the contract says this is a non-refundable security deposit, and I know that we don't have the option to cancel, but we'd like to go ahead and pretend like that's not the case. And because this pandemic has hit, we want to find out how we can just sort of go back to a time before any of us knew each other. And a lot of vendors were up against a wall with that situation specifically, which is suddenly you were faced with this really difficult challenge of balancing what's more important, holding on to the language of a contract or possibly getting a scathing review from somebody who feels like they've been cheated or abused or taken advantage of. And as our industry is so much about the reputation that we constantly build, the idea of getting a terrible review where it looks like we're villains profiteering in a time that is troubling for all of us would be something that could be really bad and last longer than the impact of this pandemic. So, questions about how to postpone, how to cancel, what we're going to do if they move forward with the event, and what precautions we're going to take. Questions like, possibly work for the CDC? I mean, what are you guys going to do for your PPE? Will each member of the band get tested? Will you show up with proof that you've quarantined for 2 weeks? We need to make sure that there's a proper practice in place for doing toasts and using microphones, and how many microphones can we have so guests don't have to share them? All this stuff specifically just around ignoring everything that we'd already agreed to was something that none of us have ever faced. I mean, in my 10 years of doing this, we never once had a cancellation, not once. We've never once had a postponement. So to suddenly see 50 events either postponing or canceling entirely, and figuring out how to deal with that and what's going to be more important, holding on to the money and upholding the language of the contract and paying my guys cancellation pay, or possibly totally losing the business to just a ton of scathing reviews.
So help put this into context for a bride or a groom who may be watching or listening to this that feels like at the jump, it may be unreasonable for you to not be able to refund them completely based on their specific set of circumstances. So for anyone who's thinking, you're the wedding band, how does the deposit work? What does the deposit go to? Or, how does this affect the livelihood of the members of your band by having all of these things change at the last minute?
Well, actually, that's one of the questions I've never had to answer before, which is, what does the deposit go towards? And in reality, I didn't have an answer. I've always put the money into an account that isn't touched until services have been rendered, until we play the gig. But it's used to hold the date, and it acts as opportunity cost, because we pass up on a ton of other offers once we move forward with a contract with a client. We look at Saturdays, specifically in prime season, like a commodity, and it's a limited commodity, and we sell each Saturday at a premium rate. They're in demand. They're guaranteed to book. We never have a year where we don't book every single Saturday from the beginning of May until the end of the year. And when I was faced with questions about why is this deposit non-refundable, I started to explain to them that we're actually in a partnership here, that there are co-signers. I'm one of the 2 signatories on the contract. And we have services that we're providing. We have our side of the contract that we have to perform. And I don't mean performing the wedding. I mean our duties to show up ready and able, prepared, and to perform the event for however many hours we've agreed to. And on the flip side, the client has agreed to perform as a host. And they're failing to perform just as much as we are. That's a really hard pill for clients to swallow, though, because rightly so, they feel like victims. And they are. The thing that seemed to be lost with a lot of the clients that were more difficult with us was they didn't see us as victims as well. They didn't see it that we were all in this situation together. And I had looked at a lot of these contracts that wanted to cancel as, all right, we're going to lose 50%, which is the balance of the contract. But it's also the opportunity of performing and getting more gigs out of that because, as I mentioned, most of the gigs we get are from people who are at an event already. And they're going to lose 50%, which is the deposit. And that is a complete, simple, shared ownership of the burden of the loss. That was a really, really hard thing to convey. And truth be told, very few clients agreed to it. They wanted to cancel in full. But in theory, the money, when somebody cancels, is supposed to go to the crew as cancellation pay because they've held the date. They've passed up on other work. I had a specific situation where a client demanded every cent back, which, I mean, personally is a bit insulting considering how much work I'd put into booking with them. And you can consider that the deposit goes towards the overhead of advertising, all of the equipment, insurance, rehearsal space rent, rehearsal pay. Like, we were still rehearsing during this time thinking we're going to get back to normal, at least for a while. But one of the situations I went through with a client that basically demanded that they be made whole and we walk away completely empty. I had passed on working with another client for them, as one does when it's a prime season Saturday. And that client ended up booking a buddy's band, somebody I'm close with, who we often share leads. And that client wasn't canceling. They were moving their date to next year. And I was trying to explain to them, look, I held this date for you. You took a long time in signing the contract. I passed on some other offers. I know the people who got those contracts, and they're not canceling. So we're losing entirely. And what we passed up on would have been better for us. And all we're saying is that we share this loss together. Almost all the guys in my crew, they're full-time musicians. So they're making money from playing gigs, doing weddings, giving lessons, doing music classes. But the gig economy makes up the majority of all these musicians' incomes, and that was completely out the window. Initially, there was the PPP, which is a Paycheck Protection Program. That didn't work for a business like mine because all my guys are independent contractors, so I can't pay them with that. There was the PUA, which is Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. That essentially ran out in the summer, in July, and a lot of the guys were doing all right with the help of that.
I mean, how many people could go 3 months without a paycheck right now, realistically?
How many people can go 1 week without a paycheck? So it's been 3 months. But because they're independent contractors, because a business like mine doesn't pay into unemployment, because we don't technically have employees, there was really no protections for them. And one of the things I figured at the beginning of all this was, well, one of the protections is for anyone who cancels, I'll still pay the guys 50% of what they would have made. And trying to explain to somebody that they're having an elective event. I mean, I think that a wedding is important, and I think that it can be a really great day or moment for people. They are having an elective event. They're spending essentially money on luxury costs. And on the flip side, the receiving end, that money is going towards actual humans who have lives and bills, rent or mortgages, car payments, insurance. I mean, any living cost that our clients have, the musicians have. And I'm paying actual humans. A lot of the time, the income that comes from the business I run is the majority of the money that these people are making per year. And to explain to someone, this money, if you cancel, is going to go to people who need it, that were expecting it, and that doesn't change just because you don't feel comfortable having your event, or you don't want to move it to next year, or whatever the reason is for the cancellation. But that still didn't register. It very often just felt like they're the victims, and because we're a business, we have bottomless, endless accounts full of money. And I think in a Western world country like ours, people are used to dealing with really big businesses like Amazon and Target. And when you want a refund, it's no questions asked. You just get all your money back. But when you deal with small businesses that are, in our case, less than 10 people, it's a very different story. I was lucky enough to have always operated in the sense that I don't spend deposits. I know a lot of photographers do. I don't blame them. I think that people can use deposits however they want. It's not dictated in the contract how it's used, but I've always held it. So I had the ability to pay people the balance of their deposit, but I really wanted to pay the guys out, and basically didn't the entire year because of circumstances like the ones I'm describing.
How does a wedding band adapt its business model to fit COVID times? Like, how is that even logistically possible?
Well, let's put it into context. We had 50 weddings on the books for this year. We have played our only 2 full band performances for the entire prime season. They've already come and gone. And the state of Massachusetts doesn't allow dancing, doesn't allow dance floors, is not allowing singers or horn players to be performing indoors. So how does a band that its main purpose is to get people dancing operate in a time that doesn't allow that, at least in a state like Massachusetts? We don't, and we haven't been. We have done some stripped down events with less players. We have a few of those remaining this year. But the model that we've been using for years is out the window for the time being, in the sense that we can't provide a dance party when there is no dancing allowed. And we can't provide the full band when that's not allowed indoors, and we're about to get into cold weather. So Massachusetts, we're done playing Massachusetts gigs. I think that the future of what we do depends on if people want a band of our size, which we're an 8-piece normally, when they can't have all the elements that they're used to. So we're still learning to adapt right now, and we're figuring out what's going to be next for weddings in general. I think micro weddings might be kind of a perma staple for at least the next year and change. And when you have a smaller guest count, I think you're probably going to want everything to be dialed back. There's no reason to have this big band when you only have 30 people there. So I'm not sure what's next for us or for live music, especially at events that we're used to, but we don't totally get to dictate it because part of it's being decided by governments. And I respect it. I'm not criticizing the government for taking these measures, although I think that there's been some overreach in the sense that there's been like a blind limit. For quite a bit of time in Massachusetts, it was a limit of 50 people at an outdoor event total. But what if it was in a tiny 10 by 10 foot yard? That seems like way too many people. Now, what if it was 1,000 feet by 1,000 feet and people are socially distanced and you have a band behind a plastic barrier? These things haven't been explained or thought about. Instead, it's just this really simple blanket approach. And I think that part seems a bit clumsy because businesses and properties, venues, bands, everyone could have adapted if they had the ability to, and we haven't been given that option. So I'm hoping, at least as we see this extend, that states start to consider that it's more about how close people are than just how many people there are. I know that a lot of people are hoping that next year things return to normal. Sure, I am too. I'm also treating this as a hope for the best, prepare for the worst. So, with what governments are doing and have been doing, I would hope that we could get more of a logical approach to this. So, instead of the one size fits all approach, where, say, in Massachusetts, it's a limit of 25 people indoors and 50 people outdoors and absolutely no dancing, that it's much more based on all of the specifics that go into it. And taking into account that people are properly socially distanced, that all steps are being taken to be safe, and to still be conservative in how these different businesses are operating, you could see more events taking place. And obviously guests are going to have to accept that they're taking a risk if they want to go. But right now, with the way everything's in place, we're really not operating at all. And I'm not sure how long a lot of the businesses that I know that are in this industry can last, solely because at some point all the players are going to say, this doesn't look like it's coming back anytime soon, and I'm not getting any younger, so let's figure something else out. And that's a reality for a lot of people in any industry, where it doesn't really look like it's going to return anytime soon or in any semblance of what it was. The reality is you might just have the attrition of everybody jumping ship. And so I am prepared to see that if we start gigging full time again at this time next year or a little bit earlier, that maybe the band might be 50% different, 50% new people, solely because I wouldn't blame the guys for saying, I'm going to go into something else now.
So many of the businesses that I'm having these conversations with are able to adapt their business model to a digital format. You know, if you own a yoga studio, you can still provide yoga classes through Zoom. What does a wedding band do when the entire concept of live music has kind of gone away?
Well, I mean, a wedding band, or keep in mind that everyone in our group gigs in a number of groups, and we perform a lot of different types of shows. All live music right now is greatly affected by what's going on, what's been mandated, and our business, unlike doing something that's going to be suddenly digital, like hosting classes or having Zoom meetings, really what we do, an integral part, is the energy exchange with other humans. And to suddenly say, well, we could offer a video chat version of our performance, it's going to be wildly underwhelming, and for a reason, because it's not how this business operates. It's not how any performer really can engage. There is a shift for some big original artists who are doing live streaming, or they're doing the drive-in shows. But that is kind of a way to bide their time. And I can't see that lasting, because it's sort of just a novelty of, this is the moment that we're in, and it'll be fun to say that during COVID times, I went to a drive-in concert and saw Kenny Chesney or something. But there aren't drive-in weddings. And when you're hired as a dance party band and there's no dancing, you're not going to engage with people uh, by putting us up on a screen or on an iPhone. So the entire practice of live music, not just wedding bands, but I think all live performers, what we're used to, and I'm talking about a couple thousand years of what people are used to with experiencing music as a emotional, spiritual experience, that for the time being is basically completely eroded, except for smaller performances. And I think we'll see it come back, but right now, what we do specifically is completely grounded, and we're going to have to figure out a way to propose performances that still work for both the guidelines and for clients. And we haven't really found a meeting point of those two obstacles yet where it'll work for both. And at the same time, I think about clients and saying, but this isn't what I want, so maybe we should either wait or just forget about it. I would say that one of the things that has to happen is that people need to get used to the world that we're currently living in. And instead of saying, I want to wait till I can have what I was always planning or what I've been expecting, they're going to say, well, this is what it is, and we're making the best of it. Or just get so used to it that they say, this is fun, and this is all we can do, and we're going to enjoy it for what it is. So I'm basically telling people to manage their expectations.
What do you think the world is going to look like when we get back to whatever it is that we get back to? I mean, what do you see for the future of live music? Do we ever get back to a place where people are shoulder to shoulder in bars at concerts, or is that kind of gone forever?
I don't think it's gone forever, but I think it's gone for a lot longer than some of my peers want to admit. And it's going to be a slow, glacier speed adjustment to get back to that world. I imagine that 100 years ago, when there was the Spanish influenza, and we were living in a very similar time, there are mandated masks and major shutdowns and quarantine, that people thought it was going to last forever. Of course, the circumstances have changed because there's 3 times as many people on the planet, and we have an ability to travel around the world in less than a day. And that wasn't the case at the end of World War I. So we have some circumstances that might draw this out longer. I mean, I couldn't tell you what the future holds or what we're going to see, but I imagine, as humans are social creatures and we naturally want to gather, that when there's the opportunity to do it and when enough people feel safe doing it, that we'll see a return to what we knew as normal. But obviously things will be different. What will be different, I'm not sure. But when the time comes for some venue, if they can survive, say like the House of Blues, to open up and have concerts again, I think a lot of people are going to be dying to go, especially if this is drawn out for a year and a half or so. But for the time being, the question for a lot of musicians, performers, people in the wedding industry is, what do we do until then? And we also don't know until then when that then is. And that's a tough thing to try to form a game plan for when you don't see an end in sight.
What's been the most frustrating part of this entire experience for you?
Without a doubt, the most frustrating part of this whole experience has been the emotional and negative energy that's come from some of the clients that have really gone to bat. And it took a lot of the fun out of this industry for me when it became all about contractual language and money. We always kind of felt lucky because we were doing a job that is a mixture of business and art. And our approach in Young Love was to always try to take a more creative approach to how we play covers, how we play music that people are familiar with, how we mash things up. A challenge for us was, if we have to play a song we hate, how do we make it a song we love? But this year, all the challenges that have, and they've been really frustrating, have been trying to get through this without closing the doors and without wanting to walk away from the industry when it has felt so imbalanced in how we've been treated. I know from hundreds of vendors, because I'm part of a few online communities where we basically just vent, that vendors have felt very much like they're being taken advantage of, and in many ways they're being threatened with, if you don't do what I say, we'll ruin you online. That kind of stuff I never expected to hear or read from clients, because I always felt like clients that booked us, that we had some sort of relationship, and because they'd selected a band that's like ours, which is a little more unique and a little more quirky, that they were kind of hip and that we saw things similarly. And I had a kind of rude awakening about exactly how we are viewed and what our job is. And it's quite simply that it started to feel like a job. I think lots of people in life, especially in tough times, wish that they could do certain things over. If I could go back to the beginning of this, I would, from day one of any sort of contract dispute, have taken a super firm but friendly, hard-lined approach. This is all we can do, and not be afraid of any sort of negative reviews, because I think COVID is going to be a window of time where everything fell apart and people understand there were no rules. We were all floating around in an abyss with nothing to grab onto, and we had nothing grounding, and all the things that we were used to being in place are gone. But we didn't know it was going to be this big. We didn't know it was going to last as long as it has, and we didn't know it was going to be as detrimental as it has been. Of course, especially in 2020, hindsight's 2020, right? Well, this year, obviously, if we could know what we know now, the approach could have been totally different with dealing with this. But one of the other extremely frustrating things that's happening is seeing 2021 clients wanting to jump ship now. And I don't blame them. I really don't. I think that there's a strong cause for concern with how next year is going to unfold. But seeing no end in sight to the uncertainty of this all is a really tough pill to swallow. And I think that's a reason as to why we're going to see a lot of the businesses in an industry like ours fold, is they're really going to just say, there's no guarantee this is coming back, so it's time to move on to something else. I'm fortunate enough to be young enough still that adapting and moving into something new isn't scary to me. But if I was maybe 10 years older, that might seem like an unreachable task. So maybe to say it quickly, I think the most frustrating thing about this is there has become permanent uncertainty with events. Even through the end of next year, people are starting to wonder if it's going to happen, and I'm already having conversations with people about whether their date in October of next year is really going to take place. I don't have the answer for them, but I share their concern. And not knowing when the end will be is a really tough thing to deal with.
So you're talking about the doors permanently closing for young love, possibly at some point. What do you think the effect is of the reality of the fact that there are so many small businesses now that are going to close their doors forever? What is the world going to look like with fewer small businesses?
Well, keep in mind, it's it's, it's October 7th. I heard in a report yesterday that in the United States, 100,000 small businesses have already closed permanently. Here in Boston, we have big restaurants that I could never have imagined closing who have, and they've closed their doors forever. For Young Love and the Thrills, we don't have the overhead that, say, a restaurant has. We're not paying insane commercial rent every month. We don't have the cost of goods. So it's more like a year that hasn't happened financially. Certainly, we've lost a lot of money in deposits and we've lost a lot of opportunity cost. But if we close the doors, it's going to be a choice. I think for a lot of people, they just felt forced into it because they can't make ends meet. We do events that we don't have control over when we get booked for. It's really an influx of inquiries that dictates when we are working. And the concept of a wedding band is that it is a certain number of pieces. It's not really, truly any specific individuals, even though I think clients think of it that way. And I understand why, because if they see a group of specific humans performing, they want that same group. And that's been our business model, to be a consistent lineup as much as we can be. The reality is we could temporarily close the doors. Maybe all of next year is lost. We could come back in 2022 as the name and as the business Young Love and the Thrills, but it might be all new humans. For me, if I decided to shut down the company, it would mostly be because I don't think that it's worth it anymore, and I don't see a time when it's going to be again. And for the time being, I'm up in the air about that. Because if we see all of next year lost, I think I'll probably say, I'm good. I don't need to spend hours booking events that aren't going to happen and then have people tell me all that work was for nothing. But I will also say that if I lost most of my members because they wanted to walk away from this industry because the industry doesn't currently exist, that would probably be a really good reason for me to say, let's throw the towel in. Because I've been playing with a bunch of the same people for 10 years. And to start over and not have that family in place, it wouldn't feel like it's worth it anymore. And there's a reality that might happen. But I'm all right with that. Because we shouldn't do this until our 50s. That's weird and creepy.
So when you think about Boston being such a unique place that it is, and you talk about certain places that are going to close forever that you couldn't have imagined ever closing, if all that rises up in the wake of this are more TGI Fridays and more Starbucks, like, are we screwed?
Yeah, I would say if you see all the great independent restaurants and small businesses be replaced with these faceless, homogenized corporate restaurants, the uniqueness of a city like Boston is lost in a lot of ways. Because I can go to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and see the strip mall with all the restaurants I don't want to eat at. But if I saw Boston become that same thing, I would think it is the death of the spirit of a city in many respects. And we're seeing a lot of the music venues closing down, which was already happening before, but now obviously on a much larger scale. What's going to replace those spots? Is it just going to be a Verizon store? And where is music going to be housed when it comes back? It's an interesting opportunity for people who want to go into that business when the opportunity arises. But I hope, and you could call me an optimist, but I hope that when things return to normal, and keep in mind, normal is only what's going on for a period of time. We've, as humans, historically gotten used to very unusual, weird things as the normal. I mean, there was a time where people had bomb shelters in their backyard. There was a time where everybody was losing a neighbor overseas in Japan or Europe to a war. That was normal to see a folded flag. Right now, we're now in a place of normal where it's weird to see someone inside who isn't wearing a mask. We've reached a new normal. But when things go back to what we want it to be, which obviously hopefully happens sooner than later, I hope that a lot of the restaurants that close down and those owners decide to open something new. I hope that the music venues that shut down decide to open something new. There is no point in certain businesses trying to keep something alive merely for the sake of keeping that name or that exact place if it's going to cost them more than it's going to pay off. So I hope that when things come back that you don't see it replaced with just these faceless corporate entities, but that we get independent business owners and business minds operating again. And I would say the same thing for what we do. I mean, the niche market of being a wedding musician, I would hate to see all the great bands fold and all the musicians walk away and then just have a new business model pop up, which would be like corporate wedding bands, which that already sort of exists, but a large entity that's insured might be able to wait this out and then bring on a whole new league of bands that are not going to be doing what we do and not going to be doing what a lot of my friends' bands do. So, but it's kind of insane to try to imagine what's going to happen because there are so many moving parts and events that need to unfold before we can really navigate that and try to get through it.
My last question is just what do you think people need to be aware of when it comes to small businesses right now?
I would say, I would hope that people keep in mind that small businesses of any nature are often the ones that are right at the cusp of having to shut down. Sometimes they barely meet their quotas for the month to stay open. And in a time like this year where 100,000 small businesses have already shut down, you're seeing just how volatile things are for small businesses. If you have the opportunity to support any small business, especially in this time, I would say choose them over some business that's probably going to make it through. There are a number of people I know who operate boutique shops and small restaurants that sometimes that one customer helps keep the doors open for another month. I also don't think that a lot of people who haven't worked for a small business, I think that a lot of people who haven't worked for a small business are unaware of the fact of just how small the business really is. Sometimes it's just the owner and one employee. I have no idea what the perception of my business is, what clients think of us. I don't know if they imagine that we're this business that was started with investors, or maybe we're federally insured. I have no idea what they think. But the reality is that the whole business, my business, is run by one guy. And he has 9 people that he's super close with that work with him every weekend. And it's as intimate as it can get. And for a lot of people, their business is an extension of them. So I imagine that for some people who are thinking of closing their doors permanently, that feels like a death of a part of them. And that's got to be really tough. So I would also just say, if there's an opportunity to support any small businesses, you should do it. Plain and simple.
Thank you for listening to Maintaining Sweat Equity. New episodes are available on the 1st and 15th of each month. Please be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, as well as our video version on YouTube. If you have a story to tell about your small business, email us at maintainingsweatequity@gmail.com. See you in the next episode.